Hey there, thanks for joining. Today we are going to be diving into some of the best changelog format ideas and structures that will help you get going with your changelog. Now, putting together a clearly structured changelog is essential to ensure that you're delivering the right information to the right people at the right time. Now, using a changelog is essential to ensure that users can see an up-to-date list of important changes or updates that they need insight into. Now, it's also useful to use a changelog to gather insight or feedback on an item that's been listed in your changelog so that you can understand if recent changes or fixes have been useful for those users. Now, what is a changelog? Before we dive into the details, it's important to remember that sometimes a changelog can be used interchangeably with release notes. Now, it's important to remember that although they both communicate critical product updates, sometimes the audience and often the content, especially the structure, are slightly different. Now, in terms of high level differences, remember that a changelog is a very detailed, exhaustive list of what has changed, generally includes a chronological history of what was changed and when, and if any specific actions need to be taken urgently by any users that it may impact. Whereas a release note is typically a very high level product update about something that has recently changed, very high level, and also tells the users if it impacts them and why it matters. Now, generally, changelogs are used to communicate to internal teams, power users, developers, and you'll need to communicate these key changes in a detailed and chronological way, especially related to important items like bug fixes, features that maybe have been added, updates to key features or functions, any improvements or enhancement that have been made. Now, we're going to be covering some of the best practices for changelog formats, and this includes how to structure your changelog entries, keeping in mind specific formatting, structures, and also what to include and what not to include. We will also be taking a deep dive into a system I personally love using that allows me to manage these updates really seamlessly. Now, let's take a deep dive in a couple minutes, but also remember that some of the best practices for structuring your changelog go back to basics. Remember, at the end of the day, you are communicating with humans. So when writing these changelogs, remember to highlight specific information based on what the reader would want to see. Now, I also recommend sorting this detail by importance and remember to exclude any unnecessary information. Let's take a deep dive. Now, I love using software tools like Launch Notes, which we will be using today, to demo the way that you can structure your changelog as clearly as possible. Now, I do recommend using a software tool like Launch Notes or something similar to help you manage your release notes and changelog entries. This is due to the fact that you can keep consistent across all your communications. So things like formatting and consistency is really manageable from a tool like this. I also like this to help me automate a number of administrative processes like duplicating communications, segmenting my audiences for targeted communications, and helping the burden on administrative tasks so I can also schedule updates that need to go out at specific dates and times, which I love using on Launch Notes. And it also helps me to centralize my release notes, changelog details, any user feedback as well. And it helps to display updates clearly and professionally by assisting you with a number of features that they offer, such as an AI assistant. Now, let's have a look at what we need to start with. So keep in mind, you need to start with your changelog entry. Now, changelog entries document updates regarding a product or software. Make sure you're structuring and grouping this entry based on what this update relates to. Now, typically this is done by things like added, so referring to features or capabilities that have been added, anything that's been changed, maybe something that's been deprecated, so generally a feature or functionality that is scheduled for removal. You may have something around security that you need to update, and especially things like fixes are one of the most commonly used updates that we've seen. Now, I like using launchers because they've got a number of templates right out the box. I don't have to go and create this from scratch every time. However, I can amend the templates that I've got here, and they've got quite a few on hand that you can use. Things like bug fixes or deprecations really been useful for me as a clean structure to get going. Now, this may help if users are not familiar with best practices for announcements or change logs. So it can help you save a ton of time in terms of the information that you're wanting to display. Now, I'm going to go into one of my drafts that I've recently created for a changelog entry that we're going to be having a look at. So let's say we've got a feature that needs to be deprecated. Now I've gone and added some content in here, and let's keep in mind that formatting is super important. So things like HTML or Markdown language are especially important to use because it helps keep formatting across a number of channels really consistent. So if I've entered this in Markdown language, it will help keep consistent across a number of channels like websites, emails, other platforms. You'll typically see this in developer tools like GitLab or GitHub if you're not already familiar with something like that. And it will help make sure that your formatting remains in place across all these various channels that you may use. So in this example here, I've got text that looks like this. This is not Markdown friendly. And if you don't have a Markdown editor or something that you can use to transpose into your updates, you can use launch notes, which I love to use. And it may look a bit bland, but let's have a look here. So now I've got this information here. I want to convert this into Markdown language. And I typically use the AI assistant to do this. So it will pick my text, and you'll need to write a prompt to make sure that you are creating this in Markdown language. So you could say, create this update in Markdown language to ensure best practice formatting for a changelog entry. Now, once you click on generate, remember that something like a prompt is really essential. As mentioned, if you don't have something in place for this, using something like an AI assistant here will help you amend that. Now, immediately we can see things here like the hashtags have been added. It has changed things like dates and times, and we can typically then just insert this AI input. Now, it may look a bit bland, but don't worry, because once it is created in Markdown language, you can use something like your preview function here, or you can use a Markdown test site to see how this would look. So if I've taken this update and put it into a Markdown viewer, we can see how we're not seeing these hashtags and we're just seeing bolded dates. We're seeing specific information that's really important so that it makes sure that we are displaying in the correct format. Now, I like launch notes. You can change this again if need be. So for example, and this is our next best practice that I would use, is to make sure that we are using the correct date format. Now, this is really important to remember across a number of updates to use best practices. This includes your date of the change and any date formats to make sure they're clear. So you can ask the prompt to say, amend this to reflect best date formatting in typically ISO 8601. Now, this is important to make sure that you've got the update for your entry valid, clear, and to avoid ambiguity across any countries or regions that you may be displaying this information. And this is always displayed as year, month, and date. You can then insert your input and see how this looks now. And it looks like our date entries are formatted correctly down here. All right. So we can ensure that this information is correct and up to date, and in terms of our best structure and best practice information. Now, remember, your latest versions always come first in your changelog. So here we can see is version 2.2.0, and so on as it goes down through the multiple versions. Always remember to use version numbering on your changelog entries, and remember to use reverse chronological ordering for your changelog entries. This is important, and this is a best practice in terms of displaying the information correctly. Also remember what the update is. So you'll want to give a very high level view of what the information is, anything that the user may need to do. And let's have a look at this in the preview mode so we can see this in a little bit more clearer updates. Now, you'll want to keep in mind information like any actions that our users need to do, and this will help them understand if any changes impact them and how. This is important to keep in mind for any updates that you do release. Now, user segmentation and targeted audience is really important. Now, again, I like using launch notes for this because they've got advanced categorization here. And in terms of the updates that we would select a category if you've gone and configured this on a tool to make sure that we understand the environment that is impacted by this change. So for example, for this one, we can say it's our internal development and product teams that are impacted in this environment. We could also add a label to reflect what this information relates to. Now we know this is a deprecated feature. We would go and add that information. If it linked to a roadmap item, I could also add this, which I really like in launch notes because they've got some really useful roadmap management features. However, some of the tools that I've used don't have this available. However, you could link this here. And then the next favorite of the tools that they've recently launched is cohorts. Now, cohorts are essential to ensure that we are using the right information targeted to the right audience. You can set up your cohorts or use these by grouping specific users together by domains even. And what this does in Launch Notes, it allows you to target those users even if they've not subscribed to receive updates from the tool. Now, I specifically like this because where you've got important features and critical updates that you need to get directly out to specific users, I like the fact that you can group these by domains. For example, in this instance, I've got customers on a highest tier. They need to receive important information, and I can lump those together as my VIP customers or enterprise users that will receive the updates from the information that I'm sending out. Once you've got all that set up, you would then go and publish your communication out to them. And keep in mind that this is really useful way to make sure that you're targeting the information. Now, I do also want to mention in terms of best practices, I would recommend that you do include any information that would be important for the users. So in this instance, where we've got something like a deprecated feature, specifically bug fixes, for example, you may have users that have questions or concerns over the information that you're delivering to them. In terms of best practices, I would recommend that you do include a learn more or additional information section where you can put in additional context for users to access. So sometimes this could be things like a support channel, a transition guide, perhaps a customer support email address or phone number, perhaps even just a wiki article that may help them to understand the additional information. Keep in mind, this update needs to be as summarized as possible, but not losing out on that key information. Now, another item I will recommend that you use is allowing user feedback within the notification. So aside from the guides or the information that you provide here, I love launch notes because users can give me feedback right here on the item that we're looking at the time. So I like to use tools for this because again, it helps centralize that feedback back into the tool where oftentimes we get disparate information and feedback, user enhancement queries via multiple channels, and it's really hard to manage like that. So I like using a feature like this where users can give feedback on what they think of our updates. Super simple. I like using this. I would recommend this as a best practice. And in terms of how this works in a tool like this is that you would be able to gather all your feedback and ideas based on anything that has come through, specific to updates that you may have for any ideas or feedback that you've got. You can also then manage this information and handle it from there. Now, I do want to recommend that avoiding specific items is just as important as including specific items. So using a tool like this is really ideal because you can maintain a consistent tone, style. You could even use specific logos. And in this instance, we can see here it goes into a branded page, including a consistently branded email to specific users, which I really like. Now, if you've got multiple teams making multiple updates or sending out communications, using a tool like this can also help you manage that consistency across multiple platforms. And this is ideal, especially where you've got larger teams or multiple product teams. You'll want to use something like this. Also, remember to avoid technical jargon. Again, you're speaking to people at the end of the day. So avoid any confusing terminology, keep it simple, keep it easily readable, and always remember to exclude any vague information or missing context. You want to include your bullet points. And as mentioned, I like the templates that Launch Notes has because it does give you an example here where it'll tell you what to include here. It will also give you some help text in terms of the information to include in a bug fix, for example. So hopefully this helps you guide your next changelog structure. Again, we've avoided a lot of the very technical content that can be included here. This is just your best practices for structuring your changelog in the best way possible and also using a tool to help you manage this feedback. Thank you.